Hi, today we're going to learn how to draw a cylinder. To start, we're going to draw our ground line, which we're drawing nice and lightly because we're going to erase part of it, and that's the imaginary line where our object touches the ground. Next, from the ground line, we're going to draw the sides of our cylinder, and those are going to be two straight lines up perpendicular to the ground line, however tall you want your cylinder to be. Next, for the top and bottom of our cylinder, we're going to draw two ellipses. An ellipse is not exactly an oval which has big round sides like this. An ellipse is similar, but it has slightly more narrow pointy sides like this. So you can see the difference between a big round side and a slightly pointier but still rounded side. To get a really nice ellipse, I recommend drawing around and around and around and around and around, holding your pencil really lightly and moving your whole arm as you go around like that, and then going back and erasing away the extra marks. So we'll see what this looks like right here. We're going to do an ellipse on the bottom of our cylinder. Around and around and around, ending up with lots of extra lines, but we're going to erase most of them. And then at the top of our cylinder. Then with our eraser, we're going to go back in and carefully erase away any of the extra lines that we don't want and pull out the nicest version of our ellipse that we were able to draw so that we end up with a really nice ellipse that's the shape that we do want. I'm going to do the same thing on the top, and I'm trying to have both ellipses exactly touch the edges of my cylinder, and I'm trying to get them to be the same shape. So the same shape of ellipse on the top as on the bottom. This may take a little practice, so you can always erase it and start over. Hopefully you've been drawing your lines nice and lightly like we've been practicing. Then I can go back and using short, light little pencil motions, I can go back over the line that I've created to make sure that my ellipses are really clean and nice and that they exactly touch the sides of the cylinder. Now that I have a really nice cylinder, I can figure out where the cast shadow is going to go. This time, let's have our light source over on the right-hand side, just to mix it up, because depending on the time of day, the sun might be on this side of the sky or it might be on the other side of the sky. Again, I may need to just extend my ground line a little bit in case my shadow is a little bit longer than that. And then I'm going to draw a line from my light source through the farthest tip of my cylinder down to where it touches the ground line. And that's going to show me where the farthest tip of my shadow would be. To figure out the edges of my shadow, it's similar to the cube. I put a little mark at the back edge of my bottom ellipse and at the farthest front edge of my bottom ellipse. And from there, I draw two straight lines out parallel with the ground line. And those are going to be the two sides of my shadow. Now to figure out the edge of my shadow, the farthest edge, first I'm just going to erase now the line that I drew from my light source, but I'm leaving the X to show me where the tip of the shadow would go. And then the edge of my shadow, because my edge of my shape up here is a bit of an oval, it would be casting a shadow that's also an oval shape. So I'm just freehanding this and I'm drawing in a nice oval shape for that cast shadow. Then I'm ready to go back and erase all my extra lines. So I'm erasing my ground line. I'm erasing the part of the shadow that's behind my cylinder because I wouldn't be able to see that part. And I'm also erasing the back edge of my bottom ellipse because I wouldn't be able to see that either because my cylinder is not see-through. It's a solid form, so I wouldn't see anything through it. I'm erasing any little extra X's that I still might have. And then I'm going back over any lines that I need to get them all cleaned up and ready for shading. As always, before I start my shading, I'm making sure that any of my lines are really light. And now I'm ready to shade. So actually first I'm going to start with the cast shadow, as usual. Remember that the cast shadow is darkest towards the base of the object. And as it moves away from the object, it gets a little bit lighter. The shadow is also darker in the middle. So here's kind of how I'm starting out my shadow. And then as I move towards the edges of the shadow, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. And as I move towards the tip of the shadow, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. But that transition in value is very, very subtle. There shouldn't be a visible line where the dark part of your shadow stops and the lighter part of your shadow starts. It should just be an even gradation, fading from darker to lighter. Now that I've done my cast shadow, I'm going to do the shading on the rounded edge of my cylinder. This side of my cylinder is going to be a little bit darker because the light is coming from the other direction, so this side is going to be lighter. I'm going to start with my 2B from my darker side, and I'm going to start shading. And you'll see as I go along that my shading fades from darker to lighter as I move across my cylinder. The value stays the same straight up and down. It doesn't curve like this at all. So I'm kind of just going up and down, keeping the value the same. And as I get about halfway across my cylinder, my shading should be getting so light that eventually it disappears altogether about halfway across. And that's going to turn into the highlight. So we're going to leave this part really, really bright white. Next, I'm going to shade coming in from the other side just to make this outline fade away. So I'm using one of my lighter pencils, and I'm doing really subtle light shading and very quickly fading it away into pure white. So right here, I end up with my highlight. The top edge of my cylinder should be pretty much pure white. We could do what we did with the cube and just lightly shade away from the edges just to make them disappear and leave this center part white. The other thing you can do with your shapes, just to mix it up, is you could always add in a dark background behind the shape. And this is something you can do in any of your drawings or paintings. If you're drawing a nice light object, you can create a background behind it that's really dark. And that really makes the shape or the form stand out against the background. And it also makes your shading really easy. It makes it easy to get rid of any dark outlines, because instead of drawing an outline and fading in from it, the background defines the edge of the object. So it's kind of a neat trick when you're choosing what kind of background value you might want to have in your drawings to put in a really dark value sometimes. Then it really makes that object pop, and it makes your job shading a lot easier. Now, just to define this edge compared to this edge, you might decide to just go back and darken up a little bit of your shading just to make it a little more clear where the base, where the top plane of the pyramid stops and where the side, and I just called my cylinder a pyramid, where the top of the cylinder stops and where the side of the cylinder starts. And I'm pretty happy with that now. Here's a nice closer look at it. And that is our cylinder.